Vatican correspondent for EWTN News, Colin Flynn, interviewed Cardinal Pell days ago and joins us now from Florida. Thank you very much for your time today. Tell us how Cardinal Pell appeared to you when he was remembering the life of Pope Benedict just over a week or so ago.
Kirsten, it was incredible. As you mentioned, I'm here in Florida, but before I flew to the United States, the last person I saw and interviewed was Cardinal George Pell. And, you know, as you know, when big breaking news happens, you go in and you have to get the interview fast and get it on the air. And I commented to the TV crew when we left how upbeat His Eminence was, Cardinal George Pell. He was in good form, he was in good humour. He said during the interview that he was very saddened by the death of Pope Benedict, but I was struck by what good form the Cardinal is when I saw him just a few days ago.
What reaction have you gauged so far to his passing from those who knew him well within the Vatican, who he worked closely with?
Well, you know, I'm very conscious that I'm talking to people in Australia and the legacy will be very divided there. But I think it's safe to say, Kirsten, that around the Vatican, within the Vatican and among the media covering the Vatican and the people connected with it, Cardinal George Pell was very much liked. Remember, he was a towering figure within the Catholic Church, still hugely influential today, even at the age of 81. He did hold that position over the finances of the Vatican for a number of years, making him the third most powerful Catholic in the world. And even in his later years, when he returned to Rome after the High Court overturned his conviction, he was still massively influential, particularly among the conservative side of the Catholic Church. And he was always a big supporter of Pope Benedict. Benedict was always a big supporter of his. So it's been incredible to see these two incredibly towering figures in the Catholic Church pass away within such a short period of each other.
You say that he continued to wield influence within the Vatican. Did his opportunity to contribute there change at all after the court proceedings for those child abuse allegations which were later quashed?
Well, it depends, I suppose, what I mean when I say influence. You see, within the Catholic Church, Cardinal Pell, I was just watching your VT before that, and your voiceover reporter said, you know, he was anti-this and anti-that and anti-this. His supporters within the Catholic Church, and this is what I've been hearing them saying, reflecting on his life and legacy now since he has passed, they would see him as a supporter of Catholic doctrine and Catholic values. Remember, the stuff that Cardinal George Pell supported and what he preached, it's nothing new in terms of the Catholic Church. He was defending hundreds of years, thousands of years of Catholic teaching and Catholic doctrine. And actually, Kirsten, it was interesting, in that interview with him a few days ago, when he mentioned Pope Benedict being seen as more traditional, more conservative, he made the point, he said, well, Colum, you know, it's hard for us Catholics not to be seen as conservative because the values we have, the lessons we try to follow, the teachings we try to emulate are from a man who lived 2,000 years ago. And I think he was very much talking about himself as well in that. He is seen by many as being a fearless defender of church teachings, even when it went against social issues, and won him no fans.
We are going to look at an interview you did with the Cardinal for the BBC in 2021 shortly. In it, you asked him if he had any regrets, but you also asked him about his legacy once he passed. What did he tell you he thought it would be?
My interest was to ask him, first of all, in the wide-ranging interview, we talked about what it was like, just the psychology of being public enemy number one in Australia, what it was like in prison. But I put it to him as well, forevermore after he passes, people will look at him in many different ways and what he felt of that. And I felt like he's always said to me in various interviews, and he's always said this everywhere, he has always been innocent, he's always maintained that. So I think he really believes the Christian message that the ultimate judgment will be now, he will be facing it. So I don't think he really feared or took much notice of what people thought of his legacy here and now.
We're going to look at that excerpt from that 2021 interview you did with George Pell now. You did ask him a key question about whether he had any regrets about how he handled complaints of abuse within the church when he was Archbishop in both Sydney and Melbourne. Let's take a look.
On every occasion when I was Archbishop, I received a complaint. I immediately referred it to the mechanisms that had been set up. In most dioceses in Australia, there are no convictions this century. And it is quite misleading to suggest that nothing was done by the church leadership until the Royal Commission.
But do you think enough was done?
More could always have been done, but we met the substantial responsibilities in terms of applying standards, judging those who have erred since the middle 90s. Truth is the only defence for all of us, and it's a tragedy. There's been immense suffering. The church has contributed immensely to that suffering, church agents, but we've been very serious about trying to do something about it, in Australia at least, and in other countries, for at least 25, 26 years.
Do you think sometimes you weren't empathetic enough?
People say that, and yeah, that's probably the case. I'm a bit
so
old.
Maybe when some of the genuine cases were put in front of you, that maybe you didn't give them that empathy they deserved.
Well, that's certainly that's probably my personal style. I'm a bit old school, buttoned up. I think there are many worse things than the Stoics. I don't think it's always a virtue to wear your heart on your sleeve. But what is much more important than words is what you do to help people. And in the Melbourne response in 5 years, I think we helped something like 300 people. That's significant.
Cardinal George Pell there in an interview for the BBC in 2021. Colin Flynn, George Pell conceded he was not empathetic enough, but he didn't ever accept responsibility, did he, for the failings exposed by the Royal Commission in Australia that he knew of child sexual abuse as early as the 1970s and failed to act?
No, he didn't, Kirsten, not in any interviews he did with me at least, and I interviewed him on a number of different issues, but the predominant interviews were around the release of his prison diaries. So we would have talked about this at length maybe 3 or 4 times, but in those interviews he never took any personal responsibility. You're right in saying that.
Just finally, do you think that this issue, the child sexual abuse cover-ups and the allegations which were later quashed, will tarnish his memory not just in Australia but also in the Vatican?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, they say a legacy is in the eye of the beholder. And time will show that when you ask someone about Cardinal George Pell, I think a lot of it will depend on where they stand in the Catholic Church as well. Liberal, conservative, that has a lot to do with it as well. But around the Vatican, I think he will be remembered as an influential figure. But when you ask the ordinary Catholic in the pews in the churches, many still believe that he never got to face justice here on this earth, and then you have the other side who saw him as a great defender of the faith and someone who was the victim of a great injustice. So it's not for me to say, but people can watch the interviews and read the cases and read the commission, and it will be something that will be debated, Kirsten, for a long time to come, I think.